Mahan, the Assistant Director for Community Engagement with the State Historical Society of Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Associate Director of the Cape Girardeau Research Center, Bill Eddleman presents Basic Genealogy, Getting Started. Today's program, along with all events in our virtual programming series, is made possible thanks to the generous support of the State Historical Society of Missouri's members and donors. Please visit our website at shsmo.org to learn more and see how you can add your support by joining or renewing your membership to secure the Society's ability to carry out its work for a second century. You can also see our calendar of events on the website, and we hope you can join us for upcoming programs. So thank you again for joining us, and now I will turn it over to Bill to talk with us about getting started with genealogy. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Maggie. Especially right now in the midst of some people still in quarantine or at least on furlough, I think a lot of people have started to look for other things to do and maybe have been putting off doing their family history research and doing their genealogy. So what this presentation is starting at the beginning. If you haven't done anything before, or if you have, what are some ways to do it right? I probably ought to, full confession, I probably ought to right up front say that an alternative title might have been, "Here are all the mistakes I made, don't you do the same thing." So without further ado, I'm going to launch into this. It's going to be in the form of some cautions or some things that you ought to do if you're doing your genealogical research. The first thing you should do, who do you know in your genealogy better than anyone? Why, you. Write your own story, put together what you've got at your fingertips that's handy. So rummage around the house. Maybe you've already got some of these things put together already, but you should first assemble papers, photographs, documents that document such things as vital records, your marriage record, your birth certificate, and also any heirlooms that you might have that are family heirlooms. Assemble those all together and tell the story of them, because your children may not know that, and they may never know that if you don't write it down and assemble these things. One of the things that's very important at this stage is if you have all of these photographs, write in pencil on the back of the photograph who the people are, and maybe in some cases what's going on in the picture. This is one of the things I see on Facebook pages a lot that are devoted to genealogy is, does anyone recognize these people? Well, typically the photos that are put up like that, who recognizes these people? The people that would have recognized those folks have been dead for 50 years. So do it now, write on those photos so that later generations will know who they are. And pencil is the best thing you can use. If you talk about writing your own story, the best way to do that in a way that is going to be around for a while, we hope, is to record your story digitally. You can write things down, but really recording is the best way to go. My father passed away 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, and about 20 years ago, he wrote his autobiography. But what he did was he talked into a cassette recorder. I have since had those converted to digital files, and I've actually was able to talk with him and supplement them. So that kind of leads me to the next caution, the next thing you should do. Interview elderly relatives. Of course, if you're the oldest, if you write your own story, you've kind of already done that. But what do you ask people? There's a lot of help there online. First of all, there's Cindy's List. There's a whole bunch of links related to oral histories and doing interviews. There's a couple more links that have lengthy lists of questions to ask people. What you want to do is don't just ask for details. For the most part, your other family members will find births, deaths, marriages, and all those boring dates exactly that, boring. But ask what life was like. One of the collections we just got donated to us at the Cape Girardeau Research Center is photographs, documents, and also marvelous digital family interviews. Some of it took me back. I kind of grew up I wasn't on a farm, but my grandparents had a farm. And so some of the activities talked about in those interviews really took me back and kind of prodded my memory when I sit down to put everything together about me. Do it now. Next month, that relative may no longer be with us. And so you want to do that as soon as possible. And don't restrict it to one session. If there's more that people think about, gee, I should have told you this, go back and do another interview. One of the things you're going to pick up a lot of in these oral interviews is family legends. And I will caution you right up front, use these as clues to what really happened. Some of them are just really neat stories. There's no way to verify them, but they kind of round things out and make it more interesting. But others are things you can verify. I'll refer to a couple of these later as examples. But there are a lot of family legends, and here's what tends to happen. They may get hybridized from one family to another. It may not even be your family, or it may be one branch of your family hybridized to another branch. And a lot of people get all irate when I caution folks about this because they say, my grandmother never lied. Well, probably she didn't. She may have heard it wrong from another relative. Or sometimes older people, their memories kind of cross-pollinate. And she may have been telling the truth, according to her. But just use these things as clues and as things to flesh out the family story. You always want to start with what you know and build on it. Many people want to jump ahead and get back as far as they can, as fast as they can. And what tends to happen there is you tend to suddenly get onto a family that years later you realize, this is the wrong family. This wasn't my family. You start gathering more information and you find out, I got the wrong one. That's why you should go one generation at a time and just build on it, get all the information you can get, and then that should lead you to the next generation back. So work on a step-by-step basis, looking for clues that will lead you to the next generation. Until you have proven a link, and proven a link doesn't mean, hey, I found somebody with the same surname in the same county at the same time. It means there has to be something that links them together, whether it's direct evidence like a probate file or a will that specifically mentions the next generation, or whether it's indirect evidence, a preponderance of evidence, leading you to the preceding generation. You really can't be sure unless you've got that proof for that link. One example I'll give you, I had an uncle who, I kind of owe him the fact that I really got interested in genealogy. I was a bit interested when I was a kid. I sent him a couple of newspaper clippings, which got him interested, and he didn't know how much time he had left. He was started when he was in his 60s, and so he went as fast as he could and probably too fast and got things kind of messed up on a lot of lines. One of my great-grandmothers had the surname Welker, and in my uncle's book that he produced, he has the wrong line of Welkers. And if you actually work in local records, it's a pretty easy family to trace back into Pennsylvania in colonial times, actually Revolutionary War times. But he found somebody else with a surname Welker in the same part of North Carolina and figured that was the one and just ran with it. And it was the wrong one. One of the things you should do is organize from the start. Most people that have been in a genealogy for a while have the story about the big piles of paper that I've never gone through. And I have those big piles of paper too. But you're going to amass a great deal of information, and you really need to keep it organized from the start. A lot of people organize it by surname, or they organize it by surname and location. But one of the things that will happen is you'll be asked by other people researching a family, what do you know about this family? And if you have to rummage through huge piles of paper to find that out, it's not going to be very helpful. So you should take the meat of it and organize it in some way so that at every stage you know exactly where you are and what you've discovered. This is the family group sheet. That's one way to organize. It's a sheet that tells you all the information about one family. Parents up top, children down at the bottom, in order, we hope, with all the basic information. It doesn't give you all the fun stuff that rounds it out, but if somebody asks you, where are you? You can say instantly, here, I've got this about this family. So that's family group sheet. Also, you can use genealogy software to store your information, or you can use online services like Ancestry or Family Search and many others to organize your genealogy. Share what you find with other people working on the family. That's how progress gets made. And that way also, if you're organized and somebody asks you, well, how do you know this person is the father of this person? You can tell them because of these documents. There's been so many times I've seen a conclusion and someone will have a family and I'll say, well, how did you document this family? And my usual clue is, I really didn't. I never get a response. So always share what you find, always stay organized. This is a pedigree chart. You may have seen these if you watch some of the shows on TV. You may have seen a version of this that's vertical instead of horizontal, but this is how we get the term family tree. I've given you a couple of links on the handouts to some of these that you can print off and fill in. I also have created some that are fillable. I'd be happy to email those to you so that you don't have to go to hard copies if you want, and I'd be happy to send those. A lot of times you'll think, wow, this is a really easy branch. You're usually wrong when you think that. The easy way out is usually the wrong way out. You never assume, well, this person was in the same county at the same time, so I'm just going to assume that they were the father of these other people with the same name in the same county at the same time. A lot of online family trees are the easy way out. And I spent some time this weekend. I'm working with somebody trying to get in the DAR, and they're trying to get in on a line that 7 or 8 people have already gotten in on in the past, but it's not a good line. The documentation's not there. And the DAR has realized that, and so they're not letting anybody else in. And I looked and looked and looked, and all I found was trees where they had just duplicated over and over and over again the same conclusions. And a source that's decent is usually not a tree that's online. You need to find all records for an ancestor. Typically what I see when people cite sources in Ancestry or Family Search is other trees and censuses. That's just a little tiny part of the picture. There's probate records, there's land records, there's tax records. There's all sorts of records that you really should be including before you can say I've thoroughly researched this person. Here's another example. I corresponded for some years with another Eddleman researcher whose ancestor he was claiming was a Ute Indian. The individuals in question lived in Indiana around 1800. The Utes, the tribe, are in Colorado. In 1800, there wasn't a whole lot of interchange between Native American tribes in Colorado and Indiana. But he was claiming, oh, no, I've got a Ute ancestor. Well, the ancestor had the surname UTZ, which is a recognizable German surname. So he had another nice German ancestor, but he was claiming Native American. Another example where I mentioned you'd have these family stories that sometimes get hybridized. One of my ancestral surnames is Link, and a branch of that married into the Proffer family. And there was an article in the 1930s. The family had a big family reunion and get together and picnic at the family cemetery. And part of the reason they did it was to place a memorial stone, which many people use as a source when really it was placed in the 1930s for events that happened in the 1820s. But they were interviewing, the reporter interviewed one of the older ladies who said that her grandfather had gone to town and to sell some produce, took the wagon and the horses. The wagon and the horses came back the next day, but grandfather didn't. And they suppose the Indians killed him. And this happened in the 1820s in Cape Girardeau County. Well, the Indians were pretty much gone out of eastern Missouri by 1820s. A few were still around. They were being forced gradually west, but there wasn't a lot of hostile encounters at that time. And the other thing was I dug out that ancestor, who is also my ancestor's probate file, and there's a doctor bill that he's getting medicine and then he's dead within a week and a half. He died in bed. He never left the house once he was in his final illness. So I thought, you know, it just says grandfather. This woman had two grandfathers, and sure enough, if you go back to South Carolina where the family lived, the other grandfather died when he was barely 30, and I couldn't uncover anything about mysterious circumstances, but it seems to hold more true for that branch. So in that case, the story got cross-fertilized from one branch to the other. And a lot of people still cite that as, well, John Link was killed by the Indians. Well, he was not. He died in bed. One thing that a lot of genealogists, I'm guilty, I'm still guilty, I was guilty last weekend of this. Focus on one ancestor at a time. Unfortunately, when you're doing research, you find all sorts of fun stories or tidbits that, wow, I pursue this, but you're not going to make any progress if you do that all the time. You also want to focus on one location at a time. People moved a lot. You need to mine out locations from the most recent on back, one ancestor at a time, before you can really make progress. So you need to focus on it. As one example, I'm so focused on some families, I still haven't worked out, I'm from Cape Girardeau County. I still haven't worked out every local ancestor. In fact, one of the things I've been doing recently is going through land records on some of the families I haven't researched that much because I already had pretty good documentation on them, but to round out their story, you really need all the records. I've focused on each one singly. And the reason this gravestone picture is here is this is one of my ancestors, Sarah Thompson. I was walking through a cemetery. I was writing a local history column and needed to photograph a tombstone in this cemetery. And I was walking through it, and suddenly here's this stone, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my four greats grandmother. I had no idea she had a marked grave, and I didn't know for sure she was in this cemetery. Someone had started taking care of the cemetery, dug up a bunch of buried stones, and hers was one of them. And so that immediately, I got triggered to start looking at other records, and now I've really pieced out her life in Cape Girardeau County right up to and past her death. She had land when she died that she co-owned with two sons, and so they had to settle that amongst the other heirs. But this woman was born in Kentucky, lived in Tennessee through much of her early adult life, came with her children to Cape Girardeau County after her husband died, and died in Cape Girardeau County. If you stay focused, you don't get as confused, and you actually make progress. You don't sit and spin your wheels in the muddy ditch. You need to know your resources and you need to know how to use them. That means learning about resources, learning legal terms, learning why things were done the way they were done. If we look at sources and resources, some of these are original. Original resources or sources were generated at the time of the event. So an example would be a death certificate in terms of the person who was the informant. That's an original source from them. It's not necessarily an original source on the deceased. Deeds would be an example. If you got an original deed, this was written out and signed at the time it was transacted. There are other sources that are derivative. That means they were copied in some way, shape, or form, or from oral information that was written down by a clerk. And a lot of what we think are original sources are really derivative in that sense. There are some that are compiled. These are typically in the form of books. A compiled resource might be a deed book index as well, and other indices like probate indices. And then there's some that we don't know really what kind of source they were in terms of their origin. This tombstone is from North Carolina. It's my 5 greats uncle, who was a Revolutionary War soldier. I don't know if this stone was set at the time of his death or much later. So I don't know what sort of source this would have been. It's definitely a derivative source because, well, Peter was not around to tell him the date information. He was the deceased. But in terms of this was possibly an original source in terms of the object itself, or it may have been placed much later. We don't know. I can guarantee you that SAR marker was placed a lot later because when he died, there was no SAR, Sons of the American Revolution. Don't overlook any source of information. The most obscure little tidbit, like a line in a tax list, can solve your mystery. Something that is in a court case that has nothing to do with your ancestor, perhaps they were a witness, that may be where it gets solved. Or it may be that they weren't even involved with the case, but somebody was deposing and mentioned that, well, that was the day I was over at so-and-so's house because their baby was born. And it turns out it's your ancestor that was the baby. So don't overlook anything. Plan your work. What that means is, and I can't emphasize this enough, I get inquiries all the time. Send me all you have on Sam Smith. Well, wait, I'm not going to do that because I might be working for the next 5 years on that. Instead, if you would have asked me, are there any land records for Sam Smith in Cape Girardeau County? Then I could do a little research plan and say, yes, I'm going to go through the deed index books for this time. I'm going to look to see if there are any deeds. I will look those deeds up and I will send them to the person. And actually, I got one like that the other day. They wanted a real specific deed. I had it within 10 minutes and sent it to them. Planning your work means asking questions that are focused and answering those questions with focused research. What records are you going to look through? If you don't find anything, what's the next level of records you're going to look through? Record your searches. Most genealogists I know have failed at this at one time or another, and as a result, they find the same record over and over and over again in a book of abstracts. And I know that happens because I have files from my uncle, and the same copy, the same page out of the same book may be in a file 3 times because he didn't record his searches very well. You will have conflicting information. And that's why another reason why I use this tombstone. If you can read that it says born in the year 1763. There is a church record for Peter Eddleman with the same parents on a specific date in 1764, a baptismal record that lists the birth date in Pennsylvania. Well, that's a conflict. I've got 1763, and then I've got a specific date in 1764. In this case, I would resolve that conflict in this way. Church records are usually, they're done at the time of the event. In that case, the baptism, but the parents might have the family Bible page with them. And there was a family Bible. I've seen reference to it, no longer exists. And so that I would trust over this tombstone, which may have been placed there in 1870, for all I know. So in that case, I'd say I'd go with the 1764 date. So you have to resolve those conflicts, though, or else you may end up chasing the wrong person. You also have to think, what constitutes proof? And I've got a number of different things listed here. Family stories. In some cases, they may be completely accurate, but in terms of proof, I want to verify those with real records, with actual public records. What about published genealogies? Again, not as trustworthy as original records. Compiled records. I have produced a number of deed abstracts books over the years, and I can guarantee you I've made mistakes in transcribing and compiling those. So I don't trust them 100%. I always have to go back to the original deeds if I'm actually doing some work that I want to hold up. Marriages from Justice of the Peace files, you may think those are original. They may also be copied off something. So watch out for transcriptions and compiled records. Birth, marriage, or death certificates. Death certificates are a hodgepodge of good information that happened at the time, like the date of death, and information that may be a little more questionable, like the person's parents, their birth date may be a little questionable. And so they're a hodgepodge. Birth certificates, also pretty good. Marriage certificates, obviously pretty good, but sometimes the clerk wrote down the year wrong, so you have to be aware of that. A will, and I have at least one will on an ancestor that I'm almost certain two daughters got, their last names got transposed because it doesn't match up with any of the other records. So you have to be aware of that. Wills are very good normally, especially if you have the original will. If it's in a will book, it's copied. So be aware of that. And then probate records. The most obscure things in probate bundles are oftentimes the most valuable. They'll narrow death dates down. They'll give you a lot more information about the individual. They'll flesh out your family history. Another really important thing is to know where to research and where the records are located. First of all, use maps at the time your ancestor lived there. If you can see my cursor here, I am running across Wayne County. This is in 1821 at statehood. Wayne County extended from what's now Bullinger County, at the time was Cape Girardeau County, all the way to what's now Kansas, almost. That includes a lot of territory. Of course, there weren't too many settlers in there in 1821. Wayne County encompassed, for example, Greene County till later, which is where Springfield is. But if I'm looking for records, one thing I should know is my counties. Wayne County had some bad courthouse fires, so there aren't any records from this era unless they were sent to the state. Cape Girardeau, if I'm researching an ancestor that was in what's now Bullinger County, the records would be in Cape Girardeau County till 1851. You have to know that, about the county histories and also used maps to kind of figure out, my ancestor lived about here, what county were they in? I have some ancestors that some people have looked at it and said, well, they moved 4 times when they didn't move at all. They just sat in one spot and the counties moved. Records are located in various places. Compiled and transcribed records are in libraries, but there are sometimes original records in libraries. Family history centers for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, local archives, and it's surprising sometimes what's in local archives. I've found county tax lists that are stored in local archives because the courthouse ran out of room. State archives, in some cases, in some states, local records were sent to the state because they ran out of room, or else the state mandated before this certain date, you are mandated to send these records to the state archives. The National Archives, and many people think Washington, D.C., but we have in Kansas City a branch of the National Archives that has some records that aren't at the National Archives in Washington. Online resources, and it used to be online resources were pretty much all transcribed or compiled. Now you can find a lot of digital versions of original records that are just as good as going to the courthouse. So, and then courthouses still have a lot of records, despite what people think. They think it's all online. It's not. Probably about 30% of what's available is actually online. It's the best 30% oftentimes, but it's not always the best 30%. Depends on the location. So learn your location. How do you do that? Family Search Wiki is a good place to start. You go to Family Search, open a free account, start a free account, and then you can open it with your username and password each time you use it, and search in the wiki for the location you're interested in, and it will tell you details about that location. Another thing that I hear from inexperienced genealogists all the time, or I should say maybe developing genealogists, is, well, that wasn't our family because we have always spelled it this way. If you go back prior to 1900, and it seems like we're getting worse in that regard anyway, for a given surname, there might be multiple spellings depending on how educated the clerk was, how well the clerk could hear, how literate the individuals who were transacting the record might have been. And so you end up with things like this. In the course of my researching surname Eddleman, I spell it Eddleman. I've found 48 ways to spell it. Some begin with A, some begin with E, some begin with I. And this document here is from a War of 1812 pension file for Aaron Eddleman, who served from Tennessee. And it is from one of his sons, Joseph, to the Pension Bureau. Sir, I received your letter. You stated that there was 2 more witnesses wanted to prove the death and burying of the old man. That's his father, Aaron. Also, the proper spelling of our names, that we all differ on ourselves. I have a brother, should be brother, in the state of Missouri that spell it Eddleman. One in the state of Illinois, Edleman. One in Owen County, Kentucky, that spell it Eddleman. I myself, sometimes Eddleman or Edelman. I find some old paper of the old man's and grandfather's that is spelt Edelman, and actually it would have been 2 N's originally. Mothers say that is the proper way. So there you got one family spelling it multiple different ways. So don't die on the sword of we've always spelled it that way, because you might have, but your ancestors didn't. Another thing you can do as a beginning genealogist, and this is another one of those things that falls into the trap of, well, I don't need that, everything's online. It's not. Join a local society, particularly if you had a lot of ancestors there. So why? Well, it's a good source of general information about that locale, as well as just information on techniques, how to do things, the fine points of research with an orientation toward that county, and how your ancestor fit into history. You tend to find experts on local history and local societies who can tell you that. I will tell you that because of this attitude of it's all online, I don't need that, there are a lot of local societies that are folding these days, and many of them are much smaller than they used to be as well. Some are folding completely, others are folding in with local historical societies. These are also places where you find people know the local landscape, both in terms of records and the real landscape, and they can answer your questions. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Another thing that I wish I had done a little bit more in the early days, and many people still don't do it, is cite where you got the information. Document and cite your sources. Another person should be able to find your source. Somebody just posted something on one of the Facebook pages I'm on about the Revolutionary War in this particular county area that I'm interested in. It went for 17 pages without a single source cited. I'm looking at it thinking, wow, this is really cool. I wonder where they got it. And I'll never know because the person that actually produced the document has passed away. So that's what happens when you don't cite your sources. So if you cite your sources, you can do it any way you want. The gold standard and the standard way to do it is in this source here, Evidence Explained by Elizabeth Schoen Mills. But cite however you want. It'd be nice if you used her method, but you should include who, that is the author of the source, or where you got the source too. There's two different levels of who, what the source is, when it was published, and when you accessed it if it's online, because websites change, and where the source is located and where the event happened. So the location, publisher, city, state, URL, that is web address, all of those need to go in a source citation. And if you just, otherwise you're going to be stuck with somebody asking you something, where'd you find this? Well, I don't remember. Another thing, you're going to be going at some point to archives or libraries or local courthouses. Be nice. This old saying about getting more flies with honey than with vinegar is true. And there's nothing worse than somebody that thinks that the clerk in the courthouse has as their highest duty to help me with my genealogy, and when they don't, I get irate. Let me tell you, for most local officials, you're way down the list in priority. So if you're nice, they may give you some breaks. I've had situations where I've nicely asked. There are a lot of courthouses in the Ozarks in some of the poor counties where one of their ways they raise funds is with copies. And so they may charge $1 a page for copies. And my usual MO is if I'm doing documents in a courthouse, is I take a digital camera. In some places, I've just been told, no, you have to copy it, which makes me scratch my head because it's not easy on the records throwing them on a copy machine. But then in one courthouse, I suggested to the clerk, if I photograph these, keep track of how many photographs I took, and then pay that many dollars, is that okay? And I'd been very nice about it, and so she said, okay, that's fine. Just make sure you tell me how many at the end and pay. So be nice. And being nice includes calling in advance. If you show up and it's the day when nobody's in that office or they have a local holiday, you've kind of blown your opportunity to look at the records. And you getting irate about it, it's your own fault for not calling. At some point, you're going to find a situation where you're going to need some local records and it's halfway across the country. You can travel there and do your research, but usually people want to hire a genealogist. So I wanted to give you some information about hiring a genealogist. It's best to do this when you have very focused needs. So advice on something real specific, you need special skills, local expertise, save on travel, ones you're really stuck on. When you don't have a question like find everything you can on John Jones for me, that's when you hire a genealogist. And I've done paid research for people before, and a problem I'd say 2/3 of the time encounter, people won't tell me exactly what they know already. It's like I have to pull one tooth at a time. Well, have you looked at census? Yes. Have you looked at deeds? Yes. Have you looked at, 20 questions to get the information out? Before you go to a professional, write a little paragraph on what I know and what I want to know. Also, you may be able to negotiate cost. If all you want is a copy of a deed, I know I've negotiated with people, I have an hourly rate, but if it's just going to be a case of copying a deed, I'll just charge them for the copy fees and maybe a little bit of my time. What do they want? Will a PDF file do for you, or do you want a hard copy? What's your time frame? People are busy. I know a lot of times I'll say, I can't possibly get to something this month. Would next month be okay? And then a contract is essential. A contract is to protect you. It's also to protect the genealogist. So they will generate a contract once they know what they're supposed to do and send it to you to sign. And sign that and get it back to them. Say right up front, there is never a guarantee of a result when you hire someone. If you think there's a guarantee of a result, there isn't, because you don't know what records are there, you don't know what records have been destroyed. And so the proof you're looking for may not exist. It may take more effort to do indirect proof. So there's never a guarantee. The absolute cheapest base level on genealogists is $30 an hour. Usually it's more than that. I've seen some where there are forensic genealogists that try to find errors for estates and for court cases and so forth. They may charge up to $500 or $600 an hour, because that is a very specialized service, and what they come up with has to hold up in court. So keep in mind, $30 is the very base, and then it goes up from there. And oftentimes there's a minimum number of hours specified. My minimum is 4. Other people have different minimums. If you're looking for a professional, I would recommend trying to go as local as possible for the location you're interested in, and maybe for the type of record you're interested in. There's people that specialize, for example, in adoption genealogy or DNA. There's a directory on the Association for Professional Genealogists website that lists all those areas of expertise. And I encourage you to visit that if you hire someone. There are many resources for beginners online. I've included some of those in your handout, but if you're curious about a very specific sort of record or sort of research, I can't recommend highly enough just going to YouTube and searching for that, because you're going to get hits. You're probably going to get more than one. So there are a lot of beginner resources out there, some great subscription sites. If you're going to do this a lot and you're poor or you don't want to spend a lot of money, Family Search is free, but you have to register and hold and develop an account. Fold 3 is military records. They're not terribly pricey. You're going to get Revolutionary War pension application files. For Missouri, you can get all Civil War compiled service records for both Confederate and Union. For many states, you're just going to get the sleeve that says what unit they were in. Ancestry is the Cadillac, and there's different levels of ancestry. As in terms of access to original records, you really can't beat it for census, for the search engine they've got, which is great. And so if you have money to spend, I would recommend Ancestry as the first one. Links that are categorized on Cindy's list are going to give you lots of free online resources. So I encourage you to check out Cindy's list. Published resources. Fewer and fewer books because most people don't learn that way, or there's not as much of a market for it. But here are the 3 of them that are out there and still in print that you can order if you want, if you like to read books. I'm sure some of these are available in Kindle as well. And finally, I wish you happy hunting.
Thank you, Bill, for so much great content that you covered. And thank you all for joining us. I have put Bill's email in the chat, and so you can definitely reach out to him that way. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at future programs. Thanks so much, Bill.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good luck, everybody.